Well, that was really rather fabulous. Hello and welcome to our Pray Lent series, a slightly different beginning to the one that we normally have as our introduction. So you've just been listening to the bassist Jimi Calhoun, who is my guest today, as we think about, in this episode, music and prayer. So I suspect that for most of us, certainly in the UK, Jimi is not the most well-known of musicians. So I asked him to give us just a little wee glimpse into his life as a musician, and I'm sure that you'll be recognising some of the bands and musicians that he has played with in his time. Let's listen to his story.
In the San Francisco Bay Area, they had these things called teenage nightclubs. And they actually happened during the day. They weren't happening at night, but because we weren't old enough to stay out at night. But they wanted us to have the experience of what the adults were having in nightclubs. So in my bands, I was playing keyboards and singing. But I always fiddled around with a guitar a little bit, but I never touched a bass guitar in my life. So okay. I'm down at this place called a Tiki one day, and one of the more popular bands in town, the bass player didn't show up. So the leader of the band, the guy named Willie, he asked anybody in the audience if they knew how to play bass. And so I raised my hand. Never touched one in my life. Said, well, come on up and play. So I did. So I went up and I played. I finished the job with them that hour and played with that band. And he let the other guy go and hired me as a bass player. So I took over, I found a new instrument, and I actually started getting paid money to play music with this really popular band. And I never went back to another instrument seriously after that. Bass took me around the world. I got to play on a lot of records and be in some interesting situations, and it was a good thing. I started with Sly Stone. There was a band here called Sly and the Family Stone. Prior to that band, I did something called Bobby Freeman and the Swim. And that became a popular dance, and you may have seen people do, on TV. It was quite a while ago. But so that was I was 15 and a half, and I got to hear myself on the radio. It became a monster hit. And so we went on the road with Jan and Dean and the Beach Boys, and we did a surfing safari. And following that, I went to Alaska in a nightclub situation where I met some people, which led me into the soul music circuit, where I played with Wilson Pickett and the Four Tops and Lou Rawls and Martha Reeves, Motown. Following that, I started playing with Dr. John, which led me into the rock arena. And then I signed with Atlantic Records in 1974 under my own band named Creation, and we did 3 albums, 2 on Atlantic and 1 on Columbia. And following that, I joined another band called Rare Earth. It was real popular here in the States. They had a hit. It was a platinum selling situation. And then I went back to Dr. John and did Saturday Night Live. And then I joined Buddy Miles, a guy I had met years prior with Jimi Hendrix. And we did 2 albums, and I toured with him. And then in 1981, I exited the rock and roll industry and went into ministry. I found myself in seminary in training, and then I became a pastor, and considerable amount of my time as a pastor, I spent playing music. I worked at a couple of churches where music was actually in my job description, and the title was a worship leader, which I thought was a little bit non-descriptive because I thought everything we were doing on Sunday morning was worship. But that's the way they identified it, so I just went with it. Which that's my that's my history in a nutshell.
So there you go, one or two names that you might recognize. But I had a conversation with Jimmy about music and prayer and how music helps us to connect with God and to deepen our prayer life. And let's hear what he says.
I have a quote here from Plato that says how music gives soul to the universe, wings to the mind, flight to the imagination, and charm and gaiety to life and everything. And so I played soul music, and Plato spoke of giving soul to the universe, and music also gives soul to what we do in church. It brings something, an added element that doesn't come through other forms of liturgy. I saw what soul music did on the dance floor, and as a pastor, I've seen what soul music does in the church, and the two have a lot in common. They're both emotive, and they bring emotions out that you necessarily sometimes keep inside, and also is participatory. On the dance floor, people are dancing, I'm playing away, and everybody, but in a choral setting in a church, people are singing. And oftentimes they don't realize when they're singing with others that they're actually praying together. They're not only singing for themselves, they are praying with others, and they're joining and participating in this wonderful thing up to God and lifting it all up to God simultaneously. I've seen the fruit of that perspective and what music can do that possibly non-musicians are unable to see because they've never really experienced that connection that music has and is capable of bringing between people and to people. Well, there was this one kid named Brian who I met in 2010, and he was nonverbal for the most part. He just made noises, and his limbs he was unable to do very much. And he would sit, they gave him a coffee can with some blocks, and he would dump the coffee can and then put the blocks back in. And that's what he did for 8 hours a day. Then he would go back to the group home. Well, we would go around the room with guitars and sing with people who were responsive. But over time, I'd wind up sitting with Brian and this other woman named Sam. Well, 3 to 4 years down the road, and it took this long, and that's important because we established a relationship with this person, even though he was nonverbal. So one day we're playing, and we start playing some some popular songs, and out of his mouth came the lyrics. So all of a sudden we hear this voice and he's filling in the blanks. We're like doing sitting on the dock of the, and he'll go, "Bay." And then for the last 8 years or 6 years, however long it is, we tailored songs so that Brian can sing along. So he never talks to anybody. But he's able to sing. And it brought out something that was inside of him all of the time, but no one else knew it. And it took music to draw that out of him. Wonderful, sir. That's one note, correct?
Yep.
When I played that note, you heard a C. Let's say it was C. But really, there were about 14 other notes played simultaneous that you can't hear. It's something called the overtone series. So when I struck C, you heard C, you heard one note, but inaudibly, there was also another a G, a C, an E above that, an F, and all these notes that you couldn't hear. And so they were silent notes, inaudible. The corollary is there are things going on that are inaudible while we're sitting in the presence of other people. And the only way to bring that out is to be still, learn to listen, and allow for those, let's say, it would be the overtones of life or the overtones of God, either way, the overtones of God or the overtones of life to sound into your life, to come in and to be heard by you. But if you're not prepared, then that won't happen. And I can do a little demonstration. I can bring out one of the overtones by going, I can do this. Now that inaudible note, I can bring it out by going. But that's different sound than this. But it's the same string. What I did was I cheated and touched it and forced the overtone to make a sound. But that sound was always there. And there's things that are always there when we come into the presence of God, but sometimes we have to be silenced, and that's the only way to allow it to become a reality.
So for those of you that have been following this series, you'll know that every week I give you a prayer challenge. And of course, our prayer challenge this week is all around praying with music. So I really loved this idea of sacred silence that Jimi speaks about. And I got incredibly excited around the expression, the overtones of God, which I think is just beautiful. So I said to Jimi, if we are wanting to encourage people to explore how to pray and think around sacred silence and listen in to the overtones of God, what do we need to prepare ourselves to do that? So here's a prayer challenge for us this week, perhaps to tune in to the overtones of God. And Jimi gives us an insight on how we can do this.
When music is being played, we're receptors. We receive the music and it brings enjoyment to us. Sometimes it can bring calm. Sometimes it can bring excitement. There's different emotions we respond to the music as human beings. But as a musician, I've learned to listen to the music, not for what it emotes in me, but for what it is. And so little by little, you change the direction of music. It's not outside in, it's inside out. So what you would do would be to think, well, I'm going to pay a little bit more attention to what it is I'm hearing. I'm going to listen differently. It may be it may be so small that I'm really going to pay attention to the lyrics today. When the choir sings, I'm not going to listen to the organ. I'm not going to listen to the voices. I'm going to pay attention to the lyrics. Then maybe next week, you'll pay attention to the organ. But little by little, you learn to pay attention to each element. And over time, what that does is broaden, like learning a vocabulary, learning a language. you broaden you broaden the vocabulary and you learn more and you put them together and you have a deeper and wider appreciation for what it is that's happening. And it enhances the weekly, if you attend church weekly, it enhances that experience because there's always something fresh and new, and you're prepared to you have an awareness and you're prepared to look for it, because sometimes the onus is on us to bring something to the meeting as well as the people who put the program together. And we're not just bystanders. Sometimes we have to participate, even if it's silently, even if it seems to be passive. There's a way to be active, passively active. How's that? I don't know if that's, yeah, I'm American. I can do that to the language, but.